Well, yesterday we talked about how that faith in the face of adversity really inspires others to be courageous, to find their own voice, and to become not afraid to be able to share their faith and speak openly about it. And it's kind of an amazing thing that Jesus said, if you're ashamed of me before men, I will be ashamed of you before my Father. And I don't want to explore that too deeply or make you feel too horrible about yourself, but I just at the same time say, that's something I don't want to be guilty of. I don't want to be guilty of the guy who pulled back because I was so concerned about what people would think about me or how they might treat me. I want to be somebody who, in a very gracious and loving way, can share with people my faith and the reason for the hope that's in me. And how they respond then becomes their choice. But Paul puts a really interesting spin on this as he goes on to verse 15, because basically, he's telling us in many ways he had become the talk of the town. I mean, whatever came out of the emperor's palace kind of spread around. Gossip was well and alive in those days, and maybe more so than it is even today because we have 24-hour news cycles. But the simple fact was that there were a lot of people talking about him, and there were a lot of people who were in Rome for the very purpose of indicting Paul. You have to realize that there was a whole legal team out of Jerusalem that was really trying to do everything they could to put Paul in the darkest light they possibly could, in the hopes that the emperor would decide, just for the sake of peace, that he would either banish Paul or execute him or something worse. But they just didn't want Paul out and around. He was causing too much trouble. He was like a bad virus that wherever he went, people picked up and became carriers. But he says in verse 15, it's interesting again at Paul's take. He says, it is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry. In other words, they are saying it to hurt me. They're doing it to say, they're trying to diminish me. And keep in mind, this may have also included some of the leaders in some of the churches who saw themselves being able to take over Paul's place. If Paul is no longer in the picture, then I can become the most important personality in the early church. Please don't underestimate how often that has happened. Certainly don't fall into the snare of thinking it isn't still happening. I've had any number of people take a run at me over the years, and the crazy thing is I was more willing to give it to them. You want to be in charge? Go ahead, great, you can have it. But that wasn't God's will. I guess that's a reason why I've survived all these decades. But the simple fact is, Paul said, there are people who are doing things to hurt me, but the thing is that the gospel is being preached even in the things that they say, that they open up the conversation. It's kind of like I remember the man who owned a furniture store and he wasn't getting any business. So what he did is he had people go out and spread rumors about him. And he said people started showing up just to see if it was true. He says, I don't care if they like me or don't like me, but they come in the door and they shop for my goods. And that's my ultimate goal. So in a way, Paul was saying my own reputation isn't something that I'm hung up on. And I really found myself being very exhorted by that, because I think for a long time I really took offense when people said negative things about me. What was worse is if they were true. But the thing is, we think about what do other people think and feel about them. I don't want them being critical of me. Well, let's set your mind at ease. They're going to be critical of you anyways. If you're successful at anything, there's going to be a chorus of people out there who are going to speak against it, diminish it, criticize it, and kind of give the impression that they know what's happening and you don't. That's kind of one of the struggles I have as I listen sometimes to guys who do research and talk about church growth. And it invariably, I look at these people and saying, they write all these books, but how many of them are actually doing it? So they stand on the outside. It's kind of like the sportscaster who can't play basketball, but he's going to tell you what the coach is doing wrong. Take that advice with a grain of salt. But at the other hand, he said, the reality is that Paul said, whether or not it harms or hurts me or helps me doesn't really matter. The gospel is going out. Christ becomes the center point of the conversation. Now, Paul also said there are some who are giving testimony and they're talking about me and they do it out of goodwill. He says these are the people who do it in love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. They understand why I'm here, they understand what I'm doing, and they support it and they're encouraging me. But the former, the people who are envious, who are his rivals, he says they preach Christ out of selfish ambition and not sincerely. supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. Well, we know that there were certain groups that were of that ilk. Paul writes about them in his other letters. He talks about a group called Judaizers, and these were Jews who had become Christians, and they became Paul's worst critic because they believed that being a Christian was not enough, that Gentiles not only had to accept Christ, but then they had to convert to Judaism as well. They were the ultimate legalists, and they're still out there, believe me. But the whole point was, he said, these people are out there trying to do as much as they can to undermine me. Think about this, Paul's frustration. He's locked up. He can't do anything about it. And these guys are running out and attacking the churches, insinuating, inserting themselves into the fellowship, and then beginning to instruct young believers in the deeper things of God, as they always like to say, which was, as Paul would just simply say, it's not deeper, it's just bondage. And so as a result, he basically says the whole aroma of the gospel is replaced by their doctrine of flatulence, and nobody's attracted to it. So Paul said, I get that. There are people out there who are doing this to harm me. But then he adds, but what does it matter? What does it matter? If people are saying bad, unfair, untrue, unjust things about you, what does it matter? One of the most wonderful and liberating moments of my whole Christian life came at a time where I was getting a heck of a lot of criticism, and I'm sure some was justified and some was just nuts. But anyway, and I was going through this, I was getting very depressed and very discouraged, and I kind of wanted to hang up my cleats and do something else. It's one of those moments in my life where retirement was so attractive to me, even though I don't believe that we can ever retire from the work of the Lord. We can change jobs, but we can't retire. We're called to be servants of God wherever we are, as long as we live. But aside from that, the real question, and I think that really hit me at one moment, as I thought to myself, there's only one opinion about me that really matters in the end. Paul said in writing to the Romans, he says, every man stands and falls before his own masters. He says, don't judge them. God will judge them. He'll take care of them. You just take care of you. And I remember sitting there thinking, God, what do you know to be true about me? And I realized in that moment, God knows my heart. God knows I love him. God knows I want to serve him. God knows every one of my sins, and he knows every one of my virtues. He knows me thoroughly, that I am completely known, but I'm also completely loved by him in spite of everything he knows about me. And that's all I need to concern myself with. Other people's opinions are opinions, and we all want people to like us and say nice things about us, but that becomes a snare. That's what the spiritual leaders in Jerusalem fell into. If you remember in John 11, he said they loved the praise of men more than the applause, they loved the applause of men more than they loved the praise of God. And I think that's a trap that we all can fall into, especially if you're in any kind of place where you suddenly are on a platform standing higher than other people in the room. You can become addicted to their approval. You can become addicted to their applause. And yet, at the end of the day, all that really matters is what God knows is true about us. I love how Jesus put it in Luke 10, where he said, after we've done everything that we've been commanded to do, all that we can say is, Lord, I'm an unworthy servant, which has only done my duty. I've only done what was my duty to do. I'm an unworthy servant. That just speaks to me powerfully, because that's the place, I think, where we get our feet on the ground and we get our lives into its accurate perspective. And that's why Paul goes on. One more thing you want to read from this passage in verse 18. He says, the important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this I rejoice. This is the important thing. And I would say to you, it's important for you to identify what is the most important thing to you in your life right now. And it can be varied things. I'm not saying there's nothing of importance other than Christ. Some people have that idea that if I care about anything else, I must be in sin or idolatry. No, but what's most important? What is the most important thing? And it should be, let me suggest to you, God, help me to be a fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ. Let me be faithful to you as best I can. Let me learn how to be more faithful every day. But let me be somebody who's fully devoted to following Jesus. And the other things, they have a way of getting taken care of, sometimes by God simplifying them, sometimes by God blessing them, sometimes by raising other people to carry those burdens. But this becomes a critical issue. What is the most important thing to you? Well, I'll quit here and leave you to wrestle with that in your own mind and answer it as the Lord gives you grace. But we'll pick this up tomorrow as we continue our reading. Look at the last part of verse 18 and go on through verse 20, Lord willing. God bless you and go in his grace.